Standing in the shadow of an ancient royal tomb, it's impossible not to feel dwarfed by its scale, humbled by its artistry. But what about the people who made this impossible feat possible? For centuries, we've marveled at these monuments, praising the pharaohs and emperors they were built for, while the true architects of eternity, the laborers, the craftsmen, the nameless thousands, faded into obscurity. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on history's greatest untold story, the invisible labor behind royal tombs. These weren't just projects, they were lifetimes of sweat, innovation, and sometimes sacrifice, all poured into stone and mortar to defy time itself. Think about the Great Pyramid of Giza. We know it took 20 years to build, but do you know what that really meant? Picture this. Every single day, for 7,300 days straight, teams of workers hauled 2.5-ton blocks across the desert, perfecting angles so precise we still struggle to replicate them today. And yet, their names are lost to history, but here's the thing, their legacy isn't. Hidden in the cracks of these tombs, in the tools they left behind, in the pottery shards and faded payroll records, we're finally uncovering their world. These workers weren't just anonymous cogs in a machine. They were engineers, artists, problem solvers who turned impossible visions into reality. So why does their story matter now? Because history isn't just about kings and conquests, it's about people. The same human ingenuity that built these tombs echoes in our skyscrapers and bridges today. The same questions linger: who gets remembered, who gets erased? As we walk through the ruins of their labor, we're not just uncovering the past, we're honoring a debt. This is the journey we're starting together, one that will take us from the scorching sands of Egypt to the misty valleys of China, where every chisel mark tells a story. By the end, you'll see these tombs not as cold monuments to power, but as living testaments to the hands that shaped them, ready to meet the builders of eternity. Let's begin. To grasp the sheer magnitude of these projects, you have to think beyond the stones, you have to think about the people. Imagine a city rising in the desert, not of palaces, but of workshops, bakeries, and dormitories, all humming with activity to feed and house an army of laborers. The Great Pyramid didn't just appear, it was sustained by an entire economy. Recent archaeological discoveries reveal worker villages like those near Giza, where thousands lived, ate, and slept in shifts. These weren't slaves toiling under whips, as Hollywood might suggest, but skilled laborers who received wages in bread, beer, and sometimes even luxury goods like fish and meat. Payroll records etched on pottery shards tell us they worked in rotating crews, with names like the Friends of Khufu or the Drunkards of Menkaure, proof that camaraderie and even humor flourished amid the dust. But how did ancient rulers pull this off? It wasn't just brute force. It was logistics on a scale that would challenge modern engineers. Take the quarrymen. Teams worked year-round, carving limestone blocks with copper chisels, then loading them onto sledges dragged across wet sand to reduce friction. Meanwhile, scribes tracked inventories of tools, rope, and food down to the last loaf, while architects used knotted cords and simple levels to maintain perfect symmetry. And here's the twist: these workers weren't just expendable labor. Forensic studies of their skeletons show signs of healed injuries, meaning they received medical care. Some even had access to prestigious burials near the tombs they built, a silent tribute to their indispensable role. The real marvel isn't just the engineering, it's the humanity behind it. These workers left fingerprints in the mortar, doodles on quarry walls, even strike records when rations ran late. They weren't faceless drones, they were fathers, artists, problem solvers who turned a pharaoh's dream into a monument for the ages. And that's the untold story. These tombs weren't just built by command, they were built by communities. The workers who built these monumental tombs were as complex and varied as the structures they created. Far from being a faceless mass of slaves, they came from every corner of society, farmers leaving their fields during the Nile's flood season, stonemasons perfecting their craft over decades, even scribes keeping meticulous records of the workforce. Some were conscripted through a system called corvée labor, serving their king as part of their civic duty, while others volunteered for wages paid in grain, oil, and precious metals. What's truly fascinating is the hierarchy that existed among them. At the top were master craftsmen, architects who understood sacred geometry, sculptors who could turn rock into lifelike faces, painters who mixed vibrant pigments from crushed minerals. Beneath them were specialized crews, quarrymen who learned to read the grain of stone, carpenters building intricate scaffolding, and water carriers keeping thousands hydrated under the desert sun. Even the unskilled laborers had roles so precise that archaeologists have found team names like the Perseverers or the Vigorous Ones carved into quarry walls, proof that these workers saw themselves as part of something greater. But perhaps the most surprising discovery comes from their bones. Skeletons found in worker cemeteries near Deir el-Medina, the village of Egypt's royal tomb builders, reveal lives of both hardship and dignity. Their spines show the toll of heavy lifting, yet their teeth tell another story. Some had access to quality bread and fish, even imported goods like sesame oil. Many lived into their 50s, far beyond the era's average lifespan, suggesting they received better care than common peasants. Some burials included tools or scribbled palettes, a silent nod to their professional pride. Then there are the personal touches, the human moments frozen in time. A pottery fragment lists a worker's complaint about missing garlic rations. A wall sketch shows a supervisor with exaggerated ears, likely a playful jab at his listening skills. These aren't just artifacts, they are fragments of personalities, reminding us that every chisel stroke was guided by hands that laughed, argued, and dreamed. So what does this mean for how we see these monuments? When you stand before a royal tomb today, you're not just seeing a pharaoh's ego, you're seeing the culmination of generations of knowledge, the sweat of farmers turned masons, the precision of artists who signed their work in hidden corners. These builders didn't just construct tombs, they encoded their humanity into stone, ensuring that even unnamed, they'd never truly be forgotten. If you stepped into the workers' village of Deir el-Medina 3,000 years ago, you'd find a world far removed from the grim portrayals of ancient labor. This wasn't a squalid camp, it was a thriving neighborhood with whitewashed houses lining narrow streets, communal ovens baking fresh bread, and even shaded courtyards where families gathered after sunset. Archaeologists have uncovered 70 homes here, each with bedrooms, kitchens, and niches for household gods. The walls were painted in ochre and blue, and some floors still bear the imprints of woven mats. These weren't barracks, they were homes, but life wasn't just about comfort, it was about survival under the desert sun. Work began at dawn, with crews climbing the steep path to the Valley of the Kings, carrying tools and water jars. The heat was relentless, but the workers had strategies: woven reed hats for shade, linen wraps soaked in water to cool their necks, and frequent breaks in makeshift shade shelters. Medical papyri from the site reveal a surprisingly advanced healthcare system. Doctors treated everything from scorpion stings to fractured bones with remedies like honey for infections or willow bark for pain, proto-aspirin. Skeletal remains show evidence of successful bone setting, and some workers even survived amputations, suggesting a level of care rare for the era. Yet what's most revealing are the records they left behind. Ostraka, Scraps of pottery used as notepads tell of birthdays celebrated with extra beer rations, complaints about noisy neighbors, and even love poems scribbled by workers to their wives. One particularly striking ostracon documents a strike in the 12th year of Ramses III's reign when rations were delayed. The workers laid down their tools and marched to the temples, demanding their fair share. And it worked. The authorities negotiated and wages were restored. This wasn't just labor, it was a community with leverage. So how did their lives compare to the average farmer or craftsman of the time? In many ways, they had it better. While peasants lived at the mercy of harvests, tomb builders had guaranteed rations, 10 loaves of bread and 2 jars of beer per day, plus monthly allocations of fish, vegetables, and oil. Their homes were sturdier, their health care more reliable, and their work, though grueling, came with prestige. Some artisans even earned bonuses for exceptional craftsmanship, like the painter who left his signature hidden behind a funerary statue. The real revelation here isn't just about labor conditions, it's about power dynamics. These workers weren't passive victims of a tyrannical system. They negotiated, they organized, and they left behind a paper trail of their humanity. When we study their villages, we're not just looking at ancient ruins. We're reading the diary of a society that understood its own worth. Copper chisels might seem primitive compared to today's power tools, but in the hands of ancient craftsmen, they became instruments of astonishing precision. These workers didn't just hack at stone, they mastered it. Each strike was calculated, each angle deliberate, transforming rough blocks into smooth surfaces that fit together so tightly you couldn't slip a razor blade between them. And here's what's truly remarkable. These chisels were constantly resharpened, their edges maintained with a level of care that speaks volumes about the pride these artisans took in their work. Archaeologists have found workshops near the pyramids filled with fragments of worn copper tools, evidence of a relentless cycle of use, repair, and reuse that kept the construction moving forward. Then there were the sledges, simple wooden platforms that became the unsung heroes of pyramid construction. Picture teams of 20 or 30 workers hauling a 2-ton block across the desert, not with brute strength alone, but with clever physics. Recent experiments by materials scientists revealed their secret: wet sand. By pouring water just ahead of the sledge, they reduced friction by up to 50%, turning an impossible drag into a manageable task. Wall paintings from Egyptian tombs even show this technique in action: workers hauling statues while another pours liquid from a jar. It wasn't magic, it was applied science, passed down through generations of laborers who turned observation into innovation. But the real showstopper was their celestial engineering. The Great Pyramid sides align almost perfectly with the cardinal directions north, south, east, and west, with an error margin of just 1/15 of a degree. How did they achieve such accuracy without compasses or GPS? The answer lies in the stars. Archaeoastronomers have discovered that builders likely used the circumpolar stars, particularly a pair called Mizar and Kochab, to track true north over months of nightly observations. They'd mark shadows cast by simple plumb bobs, adjusting their measurements until they achieved near-perfect alignment. This wasn't just construction, it was astronomy in action, a marriage of earthly labor and celestial knowledge. Perhaps most astonishing are the ramps, not the simple straight inclines you might imagine, but sophisticated zigzagging structures that spiraled up the pyramid sides. Traces of these ramps have been found in quarries, their steep angles calculated to maximize efficiency while minimizing material. Workers would drag blocks up these temporary pathways, then disassemble the ramps as they descended, a system so effective that modern engineers have used similar principles in disaster relief operations to move heavy debris. What these techniques reveal is a culture that didn't just build, they problem-solved on a grand scale. When copper chisels dulled too quickly against hard granite, they developed bronze-tipped drills with abrasive sand to cut through stone like butter. When water was scarce near desert quarries, they dug wells reaching deep into groundwater tables. Every challenge met with innovation, every obstacle overcome with collective wisdom. These weren't just laborers following orders, they were pioneers rewriting the limits of what humans could achieve with simple tools and boundless creativity. And here's the legacy that still echoes today. Their methods weren't just about moving stone, but about moving knowledge. The same wet sand technique now inspires desert road construction projects. Their astronomical alignments inform modern architectural principles of solar positioning. Even their ramp systems find new life in wheelchair accessibility designs. The true monument these workers left behind wasn't just the tombs, it was the brilliance encoded in every chisel mark, every aligned corner, proving that human ingenuity, when harnessed by many hands working as one, can truly bend the earth to its will. The desert sun beat down relentlessly on the workers hauling stone blocks up the pyramid's rising slopes, their bodies pushed to the brink day after day. Skeletal remains from worker cemeteries tell a stark truth. Construction was brutal. Vertebrae fused together from years of carrying heavy loads, shoulders marked by repetitive stress injuries, and healed fractures in arms and legs. These were the hidden costs of immortality carved in stone. One particularly poignant discovery was the skeleton of a young laborer with a crushed pelvis, likely from a collapsing ramp. Yet what's astonishing isn't just the injuries, it's the evidence that many survived them. Medical papyri from el-medina read like ancient emergency manuals, detailing treatments that border on revolutionary for their time. A broken leg might be set with wooden splints and bandages soaked in honey to prevent infection. A deep cut could be stitched with linen thread and treated with a paste of ground malachite, a copper-based mineral with natural antibacterial properties. Workers suffering from heat stroke were revived with salted water, a rudimentary electrolyte solution, while those with respiratory issues inhaled steam infused with eucalyptus or frankincense. These weren't crude attempts at healing, they were systematic, evidence-based practices passed down through generations of medical practitioners. But perhaps the most telling clue about how these laborers were valued lies in their final resting places. Near the Valley of the Kings, archaeologists uncovered a cemetery where tomb builders were buried with surprising dignity. Some graves contained tools, a chisel placed lovingly in a stonemason's hands, a scribe's pallet tucked beside an administrator. Others held amulets or scraps of gold leaf, honors typically reserved for the elite. One burial even featured a wooden prosthetic toe, carefully crafted to help its owner walk in the afterlife. These weren't the graves of disposable workers, they were memorials to skilled professionals whose contributions merited respect. The system supporting them was equally sophisticated. Work rosters show rotations designed to prevent exhaustion, with teams swapping between high-risk tasks like quarrying and lighter duties like mortar mixing. Rations included protein-rich fish and legumes to maintain strength, while on-site supervisors kept meticulous records of injuries, early precursors to workplace safety logs. When accidents did occur, compensation existed. A worker blinded by flying rock chips might receive a pension in grain and oil, ensuring his family wouldn't starve. This level of care wasn't just altruism, it was pragmatism. Training a skilled artisan took years, and losing one to preventable injury was a waste of resources. But there's something more profound at work here too. The way a society treats its laborers reveals its values. In these tombs, we see a civilization that understood its greatness depended not just on the vision of its rulers, but on the calloused hands that turned that vision into reality. The fractures healed, the prosthetics crafted, the honorable burials given, all whisper a truth louder than any monument. These workers mattered. Beneath the shadow of Pharaoh's grand vision, another story unfolds. One of women hauling water jars through the dust, their hands shaping not stone, but the very fabric that made construction possible. For too long, their contributions were relegated to footnotes, but now archaeology is rewriting that narrative. Take Peseshet, for example. An inscription in a physician's tomb names her as overseer of the women healers, suggesting she may have cared for laborers. Then there's the payroll ostracon from Der el-Medina listing a woman named Nonakt, who received the same grain ration as male workers, proof that some women weren't just supporting these projects, but were officially recognized as part of the workforce. Their roles were as varied as they were vital. In the worker villages, women ground grain into flour for the thousands of loaves needed daily, brewed beer in massive vats, and spun linen into bandages for medical care. But they weren't confined to domestic tasks. Tomb paintings in Saqqara show women weaving the giant reed mats used to cushion blocks during transport, while others supervised textile workshops producing the ropes that hauled those same stones. And here's the revelation: some women left their signatures. A faint but deliberate made by T was found etched into a temple column's base, while fragments of blue faience tiles bear the fingerprints of female artisans who shaped them. What's even more striking is the evidence of women in leadership. A limestone stela from Giza depicts a woman named Nebet supervising a team of bricklayers, her title, Keeper of the Accounts, etched beside her image. In a society where we assume men held all power, these fragments tell a different story. Women managed resources, directed labor, and even negotiated disputes. Medical texts from the time reference female doctors treating work-related injuries, their prescriptions for willow bark poultices and honey-soaked gauze as precise as any modern protocol. So what does this tell us about gender in these ancient societies? It's a tapestry of contradictions. Yes, patriarchal structures existed. Women couldn't become pharaohs, but in the trenches of tomb construction, necessity blurred rigid roles. When a project required 30,000 workers, every able hand mattered. The same payroll records that list men hauling stone also show women paid in silver rings for their pottery work. Skeletal studies reveal female remains with the same muscular markers as their male counterparts, suggesting some participated in heavy labor. And in death, the distinction faded further. The grave of a woman named Ipe was found with a mason's toolkit, her chisels polished from years of use. These women weren't exceptions, they were the rule. The invisibility of their labor says more about modern assumptions than ancient reality. When we picture a pyramid rising, we must also see the woman balancing a water jug on her head, the healer setting a broken arm, the artisan pressing gold leaf into hieroglyphs. Their stories don't just add a layer to history, they force us to rebuild the entire foundation. Because a tomb meant to last eternity wasn't just the work of kings and architects. It was built quite literally on the backs of those history almost forgot. Hollywood loves its dramatic scenes of whip-cracking overseers forcing slaves to haul pyramid stones, but the truth is far more complex and far more human. While slavery certainly existed in ancient Egypt, the workers who built royal tombs weren't just faceless masses in chains. Archaeological evidence paints a nuanced picture where forced labor and skilled craftsmanship existed side by side, revealing an economy that relied on both coercion and incentive. Take the case of the pyramids at Giza. Worker cemeteries near the site contain bodies with distinct burial styles, some laid in simple pits with their arms crossed, others in more elaborate graves with pottery offerings. The variation tells a story. While some laborers might have been conscripted prisoners of war or debtors working off obligations, others were local farmers volunteering during the Nile's flood season, earning wages in grain and beer. Payroll records etched on limestone flakes list rations distributed to crews with names like the Green Gang or the Strong Ones, suggesting team pride rather than despair. Even more telling, some workers received bonuses, extra oil or linen for exceptional work, a practice unheard of in purely slave-driven systems, yet slavery's shadow wasn't absent. Inscriptions from the reign of Ramses II mention captured Hittite warriors sent to quarry stone, while papyri from the New Kingdom detail merit laborers, people working to repay debts or legal penalties. But here's the twist: these workers often blended into broader crews. A single team might include a mix of paid artisans, seasonal volunteers, and indentured laborers, all supervised by the same foreman. The key difference: mobility. Skilled workers could petition for better conditions or even leave when contracts ended, while prisoners had no such recourse. What's truly fascinating is how these systems intertwined. A stela from Deir el-Medina records a dispute where a scribe accused of underpaying workers was forced to compensate them, hardly the justice you'd expect in a slave economy. Meanwhile, temple archives show that some servants of the king, long assumed to be slaves, actually owned property, paid taxes, and even hired their own laborers. This wasn't black and white oppression. It was a spectrum of dependence and agency, where a prisoner carving limestone one year might earn enough to buy a plot of land the next. So why does this distinction matter? Because it reshapes how we see these monuments. A tomb built solely by slaves would be a testament to tyranny, but one crafted by both hands in chains and hands raised willingly. That's a mirror of society itself, flawed, layered, and human. The stones don't just whisper of pharaohs, they echo the clink of wages counted, the grumble of a fed-up worker arguing for his bread, the quiet triumph of an artist signing his name where no one would see it until now. To understand why workers would spend decades carving tombs into mountainsides or hauling stones under the desert sun, you have to step into their worldview, one where the boundary between physical labor and spiritual duty blurred into insignificance. In ancient Egypt, every block laid wasn't just construction, it was an act of devotion. The pharaoh wasn't merely a ruler, he was the living embodiment of Horus, the god who held chaos at bay. If his tomb failed, if his journey to the afterlife faltered, the very balance of the cosmic order would crumble. Workers weren't just building a grave, they were stitching the universe together. This belief wasn't abstract. Tomb paintings show laborers making offerings to Ptah, the god of craftsmen, before swinging their mallets. Payroll records include extra rations during religious festivals, when work paused for processions honoring the dead. Even the tools carried spiritual weight. Chisels were blessed in temples, and measuring cords were said to be infused with the wisdom of Thoth. A worker's daily grind wasn't separate from his faith, it was his faith in motion. Half a world away in China, the motivation was different but equally profound. Building the tomb of Qin Shi Huang wasn't just a job, it was an extension of filial piety, the sacred duty to honor one's ruler as a father. The terracotta army's artisans, thousands of them, left inscriptions revealing their pride, made by the hands of Zhang, loyal servant of the Son of Heaven. For them, perfection wasn't optional. A single flaw in a warrior's sculpted face could dishonor the emperor's spirit, risking misfortune for generations. Yet spirituality wasn't just about obligation, it was about identity. In Egypt, workers at Deir el-Medina built shrines to Hathor and Meretseger, the cobra goddess who protected craftsmen. They left votive statues of themselves kneeling in prayer, as if to say, "Remember me too." In China, laborers buried near imperial tombs were often interred with miniature replicas of their tools, a plea to continue their sacred work in the afterlife. The most striking evidence of this fusion of labor and faith lies in the artifacts they left behind. An Egyptian ostracon shows a sketch of a worker's family offering food to the tomb's statue, ensuring their own ancestors would be fed in death as they fed the pharaoh's spirit. A Qin dynasty clay tablet lists not just work quotas but prayers for the emperor's immortality written in the margins. These weren't people clocking in and out, they were participants in a cosmic covenant. What modern minds might dismiss as superstition was for them a source of endurance. When your blistered hands become part of a god's promise, when your sweat ensures the sunrise will come tomorrow, fatigue takes on new meaning. That's why the walls of tombs aren't just decorated, they're inscribed with the workers' own names hidden in cartouches, their silent claim. I too helped hold back the darkness. In the end, these tombs weren't just monuments to power. They were the physical manifestation of an entire civilization's heartbeat, one hammer strike, one prayer at a time. Standing at the base of the Great Pyramid, you're not just looking at a pile of stones, you're witnessing a mathematical manifesto carved in limestone. The precision of these structures isn't just impressive, it's borderline miraculous. Take the alignment. All four sides face the cardinal directions with an error margin thinner than a credit card. Modern architects using laser levels struggle to match this accuracy, yet the builders achieved it with nothing but wooden rods and the night sky. How? They turned astronomy into a tool. Researchers now believe they tracked the circular motion of stars like Kochab and Mizar, using their positions to triangulate true north over months of observations. This wasn't guesswork, it was celestial calculus in action. Then there's the pyramid's secret harmony with the stars. The three pyramids of Giza mirror the belt of Orion with eerie precision, their layout matching the constellation stars as they appeared in 2500 BC. Skeptics call it coincidence, but the math tells a different story. The distance between the pyramids correlates to the star's brightness, and even the Nile's position mirrors the Milky Way in this cosmic blueprint. Was this intentional? Ancient texts offer clues. The pyramid texts carved inside 5th dynasty tombs speak of pharaohs joining Orion in the afterlife, suggesting the alignment was a stairway to the heavens. But the mysteries don't stop at the sky. Inside the Great Pyramid's king's chamber, something extraordinary happens. The room's dimensions create a resonance frequency of 432 Hz, the same vibrational pitch found in sacred sites worldwide, from Stonehenge to Greek temples. Stand in the center and clap, and the sound lingers like a struck gong. Engineers argue this acoustic effect couldn't be accidental. The chamber's granite walls were cut to millimeter-perfect thickness to achieve it. Some theorize these sonic properties were meant to amplify rituals, turning prayers into physical vibrations that could reach the gods. The debate rages on. Were these features deliberate masterstrokes or happy accidents? Look at the Serapeum of Saqqara, where 24 granite sarcophagi weighing 80 tons each fit together so tightly that not even a hair can slip between them. Their surfaces are polished to optical flatness, a technique requiring abrasives and technology we didn't think existed then. Mainstream archaeology attributes this to relentless hand polishing, but engineers point out it would take generations of labor per box, an impracticality even for the ancients. Alternative theories suggest lost polishing methods or even advanced tools, though no evidence supports this. What's undeniable is the depth of knowledge at play. The bent pyramid's unique angle shift midway up. It's now seen as a structural correction after the builders noticed stress fractures, proof they learned from real-time failures. The ventilation shafts in the Great Pyramid, they align with stars not just at the pyramid's completion, but in 2500 BCE, acting as a celestial time capsule. These aren't just buildings, they're encrypted messages from the past, challenging us to decipher how a civilization without wheels or iron could orchestrate such perfection. Perhaps the answer lies in a forgotten truth, that ancient science wasn't primitive, just different. Their technology wasn't gadgets but millennia of accumulated sky watching, trial and error, and an obsessive pursuit of precision we're only beginning to decode. Every perfectly placed block whispers the same humbling reminder: our ancestors weren't just workers, they were innovators who turned the heavens into a blueprint and stone into immortality. Walk through the corridors of any royal tomb, and you'll find the walls alive with stories not just of gods and kings, but of the people who built them. These carvings weren't mere decorations, they were a canvas for the workers' world. Take the tomb of Reshaping in Thebes, where vivid paintings show scribes tallying bricks, carpenters shaping beams, and bakers kneading dough for the workforce. But look closer and the real magic emerges. Hidden in the margins, a cheeky artisan carved a tiny mouse nibbling at a loaf of bread, a silent jab at the strict rationing system. Then there's the graffiti. High in the burial chambers of the Valley of the Kings, names like Painab and Kenakepeshef appear in cramped hieratic script, scrawled where only fellow workers would see them. These weren't acts of vandalism, they were claims of identity in a system that rarely recorded individual contributions. One particularly poignant inscription reads, "I, Amenhotep, son of Hapu, painted this wall with my own hands," a rare moment where a craftsman steps out of the shadows to say, "I was here." But the humor cuts deepest. In el-medina, a crude sketch shows a foreman with donkey ears, captioned, "He who shouts louder than his donkey." Another ostracon depicts a supervisor tripping over a pile of stones, his wig flying off an ancient meme mocking authority. These jokes weren't just stress relief, they were acts of subtle resistance, proving that even under the weight of monumental labor, humanity refused to be crushed. The most revealing details, though, are the mistakes. A half-finished carving in Seti, the first tomb, shows a worker's guidelines still visible beneath the final artwork, proof that even master artisans had to sketch first. In the Red Pyramid, a painter accidentally smudged a hieroglyph and left it uncorrected, perhaps rushing to meet a deadline. These flaws aren't failures, they're fingerprints, reminding us that perfection wasn't the goal, participation was. What emerges isn't just art, it's dialogue. A scene of fishermen hauling nets might double as a metaphor for workers pulling stones. A banquet painting could secretly represent their own modest feasts after payday. Even the sacred texts contain worker slang, spells peppered with terms from the quarry or workshop. This wasn't just decoration for the dead, it was a mirror held up to the living, saying, "We see you too." So the next time you admire a tomb's golden murals, remember, the true treasure isn't the gold leaf or lapis lazuli. It's the doodle of a cat chasing a bird in the margin, the whispered joke in pigment, the name scratched where no pharaoh would notice. These workers didn't just build eternity, they smuggled themselves into it, one irreverent stroke at a time. The notion that tomb workers toiled under the lash for nothing but suffering couldn't be further from the truth. Payroll records etched on pottery shards and limestone flakes reveal an intricate economy where labor was exchanged for tangible rewards. At el-medina, the village of royal tomb builders, scribes kept meticulous accounts not just of hours worked, but of rations distributed down to the last loaf of bread and jug of beer. A typical worker's monthly pay included 10 sacks of emmer wheat, 2 barrels of barley beer, bundles of onions and garlic, even occasional luxuries like fish from the Nile or cuts of Nile perch. These weren't mere survival rations, they were currencies in a bustling barter system. A skilled painter might earn extra oil for vibrant pigments, while a quarry foreman could negotiate double-grain shares during the scorching summer months. But the real surprise comes from the bonus system. Papyrus records from the reign of Ramses III detail merit payments, rewards for craftsmanship that went above expectations. A sculptor who perfected the curve of a god's eyebrow might receive a copper mirror or a linen tunic finer than standard issue. An architect whose measurements required no corrections could be granted an extra 10 days leave during the inundation season. Even medical care was part of the package. Doctors attached to work crews received bonuses of honey and medicinal herbs when their patients returned to duty faster than anticipated. What's fascinating is how these payments reflected societal hierarchy. A master draftsman's wages could be 5 times that of a laborer hauling mud bricks, not unlike modern pay scales between engineers and construction workers. But status wasn't the only factor. Seasonal adjustments show remarkable awareness of human needs: extra fat in winter rations for energy, increased salt during summer to prevent dehydration. Workers even had a form of insurance. Injury compensation tables list payments equivalent to 6 months' wages for a lost finger, a year's for a blinded eye. The most telling detail: these records weren't kept by the workers. They were official state documents. When a scribe in year 40 of Ramses II's reign accidentally shorted a crew their garlic allotment, the error was corrected in red ink with interest. This wasn't just accounting, it was a contractual acknowledgement that skilled labor had value. The system wasn't perfect. Delays happened, and strikes over late payments are well documented, but the very existence of such disputes proves workers had leverage. So what does this say about their place in society? Think of it like this: you don't meticulously track bonuses for disposable labor. You don't award a slave artist with a gold ring for perfect hieroglyphs. These payments, down to the last measured drop of beer, whisper a truth louder than any monument. The hands that built eternity weren't just used, they were invested in. And perhaps that's the most revolutionary discovery of all. The air in the Valley of the Kings hung heavy with tension on that scorching day in the 29th year of Ramses III's reign. The usual rhythmic clinking of chisels had fallen silent. Instead, hundreds of workers from Deir el-Medina stood shoulder to shoulder outside the granaries, their empty sacks piled at their feet like accusations. The state's bread and beer shipments, their wages were 20 days late. For people living on the edge of subsistence, this wasn't just inconvenience, it was starvation. So they did something revolutionary. They walked off the job. The strike records, preserved on crumbling papyrus, crackle with urgency. "We are hungry," the workers declared. "Our bellies are empty," our children cry. "We will not return until our rations are paid." And here's what shocks modern readers: it worked. After 5 days of protests, officials relented, distributing grain from temple reserves. This wasn't an isolated incident. Over the next decade, these laborers struck at least 3 more times, each protest meticulously documented like chapters in an ancient Union playbook. What's astonishing isn't just that these protests happened, it's how organized they were. Workers didn't riot blindly. They marched to temples, the seats of power, and staged sit-ins. They appointed spokesmen to negotiate, citing legal precedents like the Decree of Neferhotep, which guaranteed monthly payments. One particularly savvy group even withheld decoration work from a pharaoh's burial chamber, a sacred deadline no official could ignore. Their tactics were calculated, their language precise. "Is it right to make us labor while our families starve?" One Ostracan reads. This wasn't chaos, it was collective bargaining in its earliest form. Parallels to modern labor movements are uncanny. Just as factory workers during the Industrial Revolution used strikes to demand safer conditions, these ancient artisans weaponized their irreplaceable skills. Consider the tomb painters. Only they knew the secret formulas for sacred pigments. When they folded their brushes, entire projects stalled. Even the hierarchy within their protests feels familiar. Skilled craftsmen led negotiations, while laborers provided mass support, an ancient echo of today's union reps and rank and file members. But perhaps the most striking lesson lies in what happened after. These protests weren't met with brutal suppression, but with compromise. Authorities established grievance systems, allowed worker representatives to audit grain stores, and even adjusted payment schedules during lean harvests. The message was clear: skilled labor had leverage. When the builders of eternity said, "Enough," even pharaohs listened. So what does this mean for us today? Those dusty papyri prove that the fight for fair treatment isn't a modern invention. It's as old as civilization itself. The same forces that drove those workers to stand in the desert sun still drive movements today: dignity, survival, and the unshakable belief that those who build the world deserve to share in its bounty. Their victories, etched not in stone but in administrative records, remind us that collective action isn't just powerful, it's timeless. Digging through the sand near the pyramids, archaeologists made a discovery that turned assumptions upside down: a cemetery not for kings, but for the workers themselves. These graves, clustered in the shadow of the monuments they helped build, tell a story of respect that defies ancient stereotypes. Take the tomb of a man named Pitati, uncovered near Giza's worker village. Buried beside him were his chisels, their copper blades worn smooth from years of shaping limestone, and a scribe's palette, a rare honor suggesting literacy. His body was wrapped in linen finer than a typical laborer's, his hands positioned not in the usual crossed pose, but extended toward a loaf of bread and a jug of beer, as if forever reaching for his well-earned wages. This wasn't an isolated case. In el-medina, the village of royal tomb builders, over 70 graves reveal a pattern of unexpected dignity. Skilled artisans were interred with the tools of their trade, painters buried with pigment jars still caked in blue and ochre, carpenters with their wooden mallets, even a physician whose grave held a set of bronze surgical knives. Some tombs featured small stelae stone markers typically reserved for elites, inscribed with prayers to Anubis for safe passage to the afterlife. The most poignant might be the grave of a young girl, her skeleton surrounded by tiny clay figurines of musicians. Scratched into one was the name Merit, likely her mother, a painter who wanted her child to have companions in eternity. What's truly revealing is the geography of these burials. While most workers were laid to rest in communal cemeteries, a select few earned plots startlingly close to the royal tombs they decorated. In the Valley of the Kings, the grave of a chief draftsman named Amenhotep was found just 300 paces from Tutankhamun's burial chamber, his coffin inscribed with the title, Overseer of Secrets in the Place of Eternity. This proximity wasn't accidental, it was a deliberate nod to his intimate role in preparing Pharaoh's journey to the gods. So how do we reconcile this with the old image of oppressed laborers? The answer lies in the ancient Egyptian concept of mat balance. Just as the pharaoh maintained cosmic order, skilled workers maintained the order of creation through their craft. A sculptor who could breathe life into stone with his chisel wasn't just a laborer, he was a conduit for divine artistry. Burial with tools wasn't merely practical, it was spiritual, ensuring they could continue their sacred work in the afterlife. But here's the twist: this respect had limits. Forensic analysis shows that while master craftsmen received honorable burials, the bones of lower-tier workers tell a darker tale. Many show signs of malnutrition or repetitive stress injuries, their graves devoid of offerings. It seems the ancient world, much like our own, had a sliding scale of dignity, one where skill dictated not just your wages but your worth in death. These graves force us to rethink everything. When a stonemason's tomb bears the same ankh symbols as a noble's, when a painter's palette is placed where a warrior's sword might lie, we're witnessing a silent revolution in how history remembers labor. The pyramids may bear no builders' names, but these quiet corners of eternity shout the truth. Some workers didn't just serve the elite, they walked beside them, if only in death. Walk through the quarries of ancient Egypt, and you might hear a symphony of accents: Nubian, Libyan, Levantine, all blending with the local dialect as workers exchanged techniques over chisels and measuring ropes. The royal tomb sites weren't just construction zones, they were the Silk Roads of craftsmanship, where ideas traveled as fast as stone blocks. Take the tomb of Thutmose III in the Valley of the Kings. The ceiling's vibrant star patterns, once thought purely Egyptian, now reveal a secret. Their intricate spirals match designs found in Mesopotamian temples, suggesting an astronomer from Babylon might have stood shoulder to shoulder with Theban artisans. This cultural fusion reshaped architecture itself. When Hittite metalworkers arrived after peace treaties with Ramses II, they brought advanced bronze alloys that allowed for finer detailing in hieroglyphs. In exchange, Egyptian masons taught them how to quarry sandstone without splitting it, a skill later used in Anatolian fortresses. The evidence is chiseled into the walls, lotus flowers morphing into Hittite sun discs, Syrian spiral motifs framing traditional Egyptian scenes. Even pigments tell a story. The vivid blue in Queen Nefertari's tomb came from Afghan lapis lazuli, ground by Cretan artisans who'd perfected the technique in their homeland's frescoes. But the exchange wasn't just about materials, it was about movement. A relief in the tomb of Rekhmire shows foreign workers with distinct hairstyles and tunics hauling stones alongside Egyptians, their poses frozen in mutual effort. One figure, labeled Amenhotep the Syrian, holds a cubit rod identical to those used by local architects, proving knowledge flowed both ways. Even diets shifted. Worker village trash pits contain fish bones from the Red Sea, likely introduced by traders from Punt, while Nubian pottery shards bear traces of tamarind, a flavor Egyptian scribes initially called the sour fruit of the south. The most enduring legacy, though, lies in the tomb's hybrid designs. The stepped corridors of Djoser's pyramid complex echo Mesopotamian ziggurats, while the columns of Hatshepsut's temple curve like Minoan palace pillars. Some scholars argue the Sphinx's lion body, rare in early Egyptian art, may have been inspired by Levantine guardian statues. These weren't imitations, they were conversations in stone, where each culture added its dialect to an architectural language. Yet this melting pot had its tensions. A papyrus from Deir el-Medina records a brawl between Egyptian and Libyan workers over proper chiseling techniques, while graffiti in a quarry cave shows competing sketches, one in classic Egyptian profile, another in frontal Assyrian style. But from this friction came innovation, the compromise, a new way to carve eyes that looked lifelike from any angle, later used in Tutankhamun's death mask. So when we admire these tombs today, we're not just seeing Egyptian genius, we're witnessing the first draft of globalization. Every brushstroke, every polished corridor is a testament to what happens when diverse hands work toward a single vision. The stones whisper a truth louder than any border. Greatness was never built in isolation. Among the pottery shards and faded payroll lists of Deir el-Medina, archaeologists uncovered something unexpected: tiny fingerprints pressed into clay jar stoppers, barely half the size of an adult's. These fragile marks, preserved for millennia, belong to the forgotten children of the tomb builders. While we often picture ancient work sites as domains of burly men, the truth is far more layered. Kids as young as 6 or 7 contributed to these monumental projects, not as exploited laborers, but as apprentices in a vast, intergenerational workshop. Their tasks were light but crucial. A wall painting in the tomb of Ipai shows a boy no taller than his father's waist carefully stirring a pot of plaster, his tongue poking out in concentration. Nearby, another child bundles reeds into brushes while an older sibling grinds malachite into vibrant green pigment. These weren't scenes of drudgery, but of education, crafts passed down like heirlooms. Just as a modern child might learn to bake by kneading dough alongside a parent, these young workers absorbed stone polishing techniques or hieroglyphic strokes through hands-on practice. Skeletal evidence confirms this gradual initiation. The bones of pre-teens found in worker cemeteries show strong forearms but no spinal damage, suggesting they carried lighter loads or worked shorter shifts. But childhood here wasn't all work. A treasure trove of Ostraka pottery fragments used as scrap paper reveals another side. One depicts a stick-figure chariot race, likely drawn by a child during a break. Another shows a crude board game scratched into limestone, a miniature version of the popular Senate game adults played after sundown. In the worker village ruins, archaeologists even found clay dolls with movable limbs and balls made of woven reeds. These artifacts whisper a universal truth. Even in the shadow of pyramids, kids found time to be kids. The real revelation came from DNA analysis of a family buried together near Giza. A 12-year-old boy's remains showed traces of ochre pigment under his fingernails, proof he'd begun painting tomb walls alongside his father. Yet his bones also bore stress markers typical of a young athlete, suggesting he still had time for play. This duality defines their experience, part apprentice, part child, straddling a world where responsibility and innocence coexisted. What's striking is how their labor was valued. Pay records list children receiving fractional rations, half a loaf here, a quarter jug of beer there, not as wages but as encouragement. A particularly touching ostracon from the reign of Ramses II notes, "To the son of Nakht, one honey cake for steady hands in mixing plaster." These weren't scraps, they were badges of pride, tangible proof that their contributions mattered. Yet their lives weren't without hardship. Infant mortality rates in worker villages remained high, and some child-sized skeletons show signs of malnutrition during lean years. But the care given to their burials speaks volumes. In one grave, a young girl was interred with a tiny wooden mallet and a string of faience beads, tools and treasures alike. Another held a boy curled around a carved wooden horse, his eternal toy. These graves don't just tell us how these children worked, they show us how they were loved. The most poignant legacy might be in the craftsmanship itself. Look closely at certain tomb corners, and you'll spot irregularities, a hieroglyph's awkward curve, a slightly crooked borderline. These mistakes cluster in areas less visible to priests and pharaohs, likely the work of young hands still honing their skills. But here's the wonder, many were left uncorrected. Not as oversights, but as silent acknowledgments that learning required room to grow. In these imperfect strokes, we see the patient guidance of master artisans who understood that eternity wasn't just built by perfect hands, but by hands still learning to create it. The same chisels that shaped eternity also scarred the earth. To build a single royal tomb, workers quarried enough limestone to fill 60 Olympic swimming pools, and that's just the stone you see. Hidden beneath those polished walls are unseen environmental costs. Entire hillsides stripped bare, forests felled for fuel and scaffolding, riverbanks eroded by constant barge traffic. The Giza Plateau, once lush with acacia and tamarisk trees, became a dust bowl after centuries of quarrying. Satellite imaging reveals ancient deforestation patterns radiating from construction sites like spiderwebs, with soil samples showing layers of compacted earth where countless feet and sledges passed. Yet these societies weren't oblivious to the damage. A 3,000-year-old papyrus from Thebes records a pharaoh's decree to replant trees after quarry operations, noting, "The gods frown upon barren lands." Near Aswan's granite quarries, archaeologists found terraced gardens built to stabilize slopes, their irrigation channels fed by redirected Nile floodwaters. Even their transportation methods reveal surprising eco-awareness. Instead of wooden rollers which required constant timber replacement, workers used sledges on wet sand, a technique that reduced friction without depleting forests. When they did fell trees, records show strict rotations between groves, allowing decades for regrowth. The real innovation, though, lay in their adaptive reuse. Broken tools were melted down into new chisels, quarry debris became mortar filler, and even chipped statues found second lives as structural blocks. At Karnak, researchers discovered a pylon filled with fragments of earlier temples, an ancient version of recycling. This wasn't just thrift, it was a recognition that resources weren't infinite. Worker villages like Deir el-Medina even had designated waste zones where organic refuse was composted into fertilizer for nearby fields, creating a closed-loop system that sustained communities through lean seasons. But sustainability had limits. The demand for exotic materials like cedar from Lebanon or turquoise from Sinai drove overexploitation. Wall reliefs boast of pharaohs sending 10,000 men to strip whole mountains of malachite, leaving behind exhausted mines and silt-choked rivers. In China, the terracotta army's production consumed entire forests for kiln fuel, altering regional climates. These weren't just collateral damages, they were warnings. The abandoned quarry at Tura, its limestone seems exhausted after supplying pyramids for centuries, stands as a stark monument to unchecked extraction. What can we learn from their triumphs and failures? The ancients understood balance in ways we're only rediscovering. Their seasonal work rotations allowed ecosystems to recover, much like modern crop rotation. Their preference for local materials, Nile mud, bricks over imported stone, when possible mirrors today's push for low-carbon construction. Yet their occasional excesses echo our own climate crossroads. When we see the Nile's shifting course partly due to ancient sediment disruption, we're holding up a 3,000-year-old mirror. The choice remains the same: plunder or steward, sacrifice or sustain. Their legacy isn't just in the tombs they left behind, but in the scars they learned sometimes too late to avoid. The tombs still stand, polished by time and worshipped by millions, yet for centuries, the hands that shaped them were written out of history. Official inscriptions credit pharaohs and gods, while the names of masons, painters, and haulers vanished into the dust. But here's what changes everything. Modern archaeology isn't just finding these workers, it's restoring their voices. A single pottery shard from Deir el-Medina might list a carpenter's complaint about splintered tools. A fingerprint in drying mortar becomes a signature. Even the graffiti hidden behind statues, "I, Kaimweset, carved this with my own hands," now echoes louder than royal decrees. Why does this resurrection of memory matter? Because the worker's legacy isn't just about ancient construction techniques. It's about the universal struggle to be seen. When a forensic anthropologist examines a skeleton and finds healed fractures, they're not just studying bones, they're reading a story of resilience. That worker didn't just endure pain, he returned to the quarry day after day, contributing to something greater than himself. His persistence mirrors the migrant laborer building skyscrapers today, the factory worker assembling smartphones, the delivery rider navigating city streets. The scale changes, but the human experience remains. This recognition also reshapes how we value labor itself. For decades, Egyptology focused on treasures, gold masks, jeweled collars, the glitter of power. Now we're realizing the true wonder isn't Tutankhamun's dagger, but the metallurgist who alloyed it without modern chemistry. Not the pyramid's perfect geometry, but the illiterate farmer who calculated angles using nothing but shadows and rope. These workers didn't have grand titles, yet their collective knowledge built civilizations. That tension between visibility and invisibility still defines our world. Think of the undocumented workers constructing luxury condos, or the miners extracting cobalt for electric cars. History repeats when we admire the product but erase the producer. Yet there's hope in the details. At the Louvre, a newly displayed exhibit isn't another gilded statue, it's a humble limestone flake from Giza, etched with a payroll ledger. One line reads, "To Neferhotep, 5 sacks of grain for inventing a new pulley system." This tiny record does something revolutionary. It ties innovation to an individual, not just a pharaoh's patronage. Similarly, when 3D scans reveal a worker's chisel marks under the gilt of a sarcophagus, we're forced to confront the humanity behind the masterpiece. The greatest tribute to these workers isn't just uncovering their past, it's how their stories reframe our present. Every time we question who builds our monuments, who stitches our clothes, or who grows our food, we're honoring their legacy. The tombs taught us to worship kings, but the workers' rediscovery teaches us something far more enduring. That eternity isn't just carved by the powerful, it's pieced together, one anonymous hand at a time. The Burj Khalifa's steel skeleton gleams under the Dubai sun, its mirrored surface reflecting a truth as old as the pyramids. When humanity dreams big, it's always built on backs bent by labor. Modern megaprojects might swap copper chisels for hydraulic cranes and mud bricks for reinforced concrete, but strip away the technology, and you'll find the same human story. Like the ancient tomb builders, today's construction crews face blistering heat, dizzying heights, and deadlines that seem to defy physics. The difference. While Egyptian workers left fingerprints in mortar, contemporary laborers leave their mark in punch lists and safety reports, yet the parallels run deeper than sweat. Consider the Three Gorges Dam in China. To complete it, engineers relocated over 1 million people, a displacement echoing the villages uprooted for pharaonic quarries. The dam's concrete volume could build 60 Great Pyramids, requiring round-the-clock shifts just like the crews that hauled limestone under torchlight. Even the hierarchy feels familiar. Where ancient sites had overseers of the stone gangs, modern projects have foremen barking into radios, but here's where the comparison twists. While Ramses workers bargained with bread and beer, today's unions negotiate healthcare and overtime. A strike in 21st century Berlin or Boston doesn't end with rations restored. It sparks lawsuits and Senate hearings. The real revelation lies in the invisible labor. Just as el-medina's scribes tracked every chisel and loaf, algorithms now monitor rebar shipments and weld quality. Ancient quarries had gangs of the strong arms. Today's sites have specialized teams, electricians from Poland, welders from Bangladesh, all converging like modern versions of Thutmose III's multinational workforce. Even the dangers mirror each other. CT scans of modern high-rise workers show spinal compression nearly identical to that found in pyramid builders' remains, proving some burdens haven't lightened, just changed shape. Yet for all the similarities, one contrast stings. The tombs at Giza bear no builders' names, but their graves carried tools to honor their craft. Today's skyscrapers gleam with corporate logos while the laborers who assembled them fade into subcontractor reports. Maybe that's why the discovery of a 5,000-year-old pay stub feels so revolutionary. It's a receipt for dignity. When we see the Burj Khalifa, we should see not just glass and steel, but the echoes of the first workers who proved that mountains can be moved, not by magic, but by countless hands working in unseen unison. Hollywood loves its dramatic scenes of whip-cracking taskmasters driving exhausted slaves to build pyramids, but the truth about ancient tomb workers shatters this oversimplified myth. For decades, films like The Ten Commandments painted a picture of oppressed masses groaning under the lash, their labor extracted through sheer brutality. Yet archaeology tells a different story, one of nuance, hierarchy, and even surprising dignity. Take the worker cemeteries at Giza, where forensic analysis reveals more than just backbreaking labor. Skeletons show healed fractures meticulously set by skilled hands, teeth marked by diets richer than the average peasant's, and burial goods that speak of personal pride. These weren't disposable bodies, they were craftsmen whose expertise earned them respect, and sometimes a share of the glory. The slave narrative took root in the writings of Greek historian Herodotus, who visited Egypt centuries after the pyramids were built and spun tales of relentless oppression. But here's what he missed: payroll records. Ostraka from Der el-Medina list wages paid in bread, beer, and fish, with bonuses for exceptional work. One fragment details a dispute where workers successfully argued for increased rations after a particularly grueling project. Another documents a strike, hardly the behavior of a broken underclass. These workers had leverage because their skills were irreplaceable. A sculptor who could bring a god's face to life in stone wasn't just labor, he was a guardian of sacred knowledge. Another persistent myth, that construction was non-stop, year-round brutality. In reality, work ebbs and flows with the Nile's floods. During inundation season, when fields were underwater, farmers became temporary quarrymen, earning extra grain for their families. Wall paintings even show festive scenes, workers celebrating with music and extra beer rations after completing a pharaoh's burial chamber. This wasn't just toil, it was communal effort woven into the rhythm of life. Perhaps the most damaging misconception is that these workers left no mark of their individuality. Scratch beneath the surface and their personalities emerge. A scribbled complaint about bad garlic in the rations, a doodle of a supervisor with donkey ears, hidden signatures in tomb corners. I, Amenhotep, painted this wall. These weren't silent drudges, they were people who joked, grumbled, and took pride in their craft. So why does correcting these myths matter? Because reducing the builders to faceless slaves erases their true legacy. They weren't just hauling stones, they were solving engineering puzzles that stump modern architects. They weren't just following orders, they were inventing the wet sand technique for moving heavy blocks, perfecting celestial alignments without compasses. When we replace the Hollywood caricature with the complex reality, we don't just rewrite history, we honor the ingenuity of ordinary hands that achieved the extraordinary. Buried in the dust of forgotten quarries and encoded in the chisel marks of ancient monuments lie technological secrets that modern science is only beginning to crack. Take the mystery of Egyptian blue, a pigment so vibrant it still glows after 3,000 years, yet its exact formulation was lost for centuries. Chemists recently discovered its secret, a precise blend of copper, silica, and calcium heated at exactly 850 degrees Celsius. But here's the astonishing part: when researchers tested this revived pigment in solar panels, it boosted energy absorption by 10%. The same recipe that once adorned tomb walls could now revolutionize renewable energy. Then there's the enigma of Roman concrete. While modern bridges crumble after decades, structures like the Pantheon stand firm after 2 millennia, even resisting seawater erosion. The breakthrough came when scientists analyzed drill samples and found microscopic crystals of aluminous tobermorite, a mineral that forms when volcanic ash mixes with lime and seawater over time. This self-healing concrete actually grows stronger as tiny cracks trigger new crystal formation. Today, engineers are adapting this ancient formula for coastal cities, creating breakwaters that repair themselves during storms. But perhaps the most humbling rediscovery is in stone cutting. For years, archaeologists puzzled over how workers at Puma Punku in Bolivia shaped andesite blocks with such precision angles sharp enough to cut paper, surfaces polished to optical flatness. The answer emerged from an unlikely source: traditional stonemasons in rural India still using a forgotten technique involving wet wooden wedges. As the wood swells, it creates controlled fractures along crystalline planes, allowing artisans to unzip stone with astonishing accuracy. Laser scans comparing ancient Bolivian cuts with modern Indian work revealed nearly identical tool marks, proof of a global Stone Age technology we're only now relearning. The lessons go beyond materials. At the bent pyramid, builders faced a crisis when the structure began showing stress fractures midway through construction. Their solution: reduced the angle from 54 to 43 degrees, redistributing weight, an early example of adaptive engineering now studied in modern skyscraper design. Similarly, the Mayas' use of sakbiob raised limestone roads with porous foundations, inspired today's permeable pavements that prevent urban flooding. What makes these ancient methods so extraordinary isn't just their sophistication, but their sustainability. The Incas' mortar-free masonry, where stones fit like puzzle pieces, allows buildings to flex during earthquakes without cement's carbon footprint. Chinese builders mixed sticky rice soup into their mortar, creating a biodegradable binder stronger than many modern alternatives. Even something as simple as the Egyptians' wet sand trick for moving heavy blocks, once dismissed as primitive, is now used in desert construction to reduce fuel consumption by 40%. The real irony: many of these techniques were abandoned not because they failed, but because industrialization favored speed over longevity. We traded self-healing concrete for quick-drying cement, stone precision for machine uniformity. Now, as climate change forces us to rethink our approach, the past offers a blueprint not just for building, but for enduring. The tombs and temples that survived millennia aren't just relics, they're time capsules of ingenuity, waiting for us to decipher their wisdom. And in that wisdom lies a radical idea. Perhaps progress doesn't always mean moving forward. Sometimes it means looking back. Among the grand hymns praising pharaohs and the official chronicles of battles won, a handful of ancient texts crack open a window to something far more precious: the voices of the workers themselves. A broken pottery shard from Deir el-Medina holds a scribbled poem in hieratic script. I spend my days crushing stones, my arms ache like the weight of heaven, yet when my son brings me a fig stolen from the scribe's garden, I taste eternity. This isn't the polished verse of court poets, it's raw, unfiltered humanity preserved in clay. The Egyptian satire of the trades, often dismissed as elite mockery of laborers, hides rebellious subtext. When the text complains that the mason's fingers resemble crocodile hide, there's grudging respect in that exaggeration, a recognition that skill comes at physical cost. Even more telling are the work songs archaeologists have reconstructed from tomb inscriptions. One rhythmic chant for hauling stones goes, "Pull strong, brothers of the red earth, for Khufu's glory is our own tomorrow." The duality is striking: acknowledgement of collective effort alongside quiet pride in shared achievement. From Mesopotamia comes the Song of the Pickaxe, where a laborer describes his tool as the tooth that chews through mountains for the gods. The metaphor reveals how workers spiritualized their toil, framing backbreaking labor as cosmic duty. Contrast this with a Chinese Qin dynasty bamboo slip recently deciphered, where a terracotta workshop artisan writes, "The clay remembers my touch long after the emperor forgets my name." These aren't complaints, they're acts of defiance against erasure, tiny rebellions of memory. Perhaps the most poignant discovery comes from a collapsed workers' hut near the Valley of the Kings. Beneath the rubble lay a limestone flake with a child's practice handwriting, not royal titles but the words, "My father builds houses for eternity." In that simple phrase, we hear the echo of generations who measured their worth not in wages but in legacy. These fragments, scattered like breadcrumbs across civilizations, form a counter-narrative to official histories. When a worker in Thebes scratched, "I made this wall beautiful," beneath a fresco of Osiris, he wasn't just signing his work, he was staking his claim to immortality. The irony is profound. While pharaohs commissioned endless monuments to ensure their names would endure, it's these whispers from the workshops that truly bridge the centuries. They remind us that history isn't just written by the victors sometimes, it's scrawled by calloused hands in stolen moments between hauling stones and baking bread. These voices, though faint, refuse to be buried. Ground-penetrating radar pulses through the desert sand, revealing not just hidden tombs, but the outlines of long-lost worker villages, entire neighborhoods swallowed by time. This isn't science fiction. It's the cutting edge of archaeology, where lasers and lab tests are dismantling centuries of assumptions about who built the pyramids. Take the DNA analysis of skeletons found near the Giza Plateau. For years, scholars assumed these laborers were local conscripts, but genetic sequencing tells a different story. One man's remains carried markers linking him to the Levant, while a woman buried with a mason's tools had ancestry tracing back to Nubia. These weren't just anonymous workers, they were part of a vast multicultural network drawn from across the ancient world. Then there's the revolution in osteoarchaeology, reading bones like history books. Advanced CT scans of spines and joints show something startling. Many workers suffered injuries, yes, but the patterns reveal skilled specialization. A cluster of skeletons from Deir el-Medina have identical stress fractures in their right wrists, the telltale signature of painters who spent decades brushing plaster onto tomb walls. Others show unique hip deformities from years of hauling stones in a distinctive crouch. These aren't generic labor injuries, they're occupational fingerprints, proving these people weren't interchangeable cogs, but masters of specific trades. But the real game changer, proteomics, the study of ancient proteins. By analyzing dental calculus, scientists have reconstructed workers' diets down to individual meals. One molar from a pyramid builder contained traces of dates, barley, and Nile perch, but also something unexpected: pomegranate seeds, a luxury item typically reserved for elites. Another study found evidence of thyme and coriander in workers' plaque, suggesting access to sophisticated spices. These findings shatter old stereotypes of malnourished slaves, painting a picture of laborers who, while not wealthy, enjoyed a varied diet that occasionally included treats. Perhaps the most haunting discoveries come from 3D microscopy. When researchers examined chisels from the Valley of the Kings under extreme magnification, they found minuscule blood particles embedded in the handles, not from accidents, but from the repetitive friction of calloused hands. These invisible stains, thousands of years old, are now being matched to DNA profiles, effectively naming tools after their owners. One chisel, dubbed Ank's blade by scientists, was linked to a skeleton found nearby with matching hand injuries. Suddenly, an anonymous artisan gains an identity, his story told not by grand inscriptions, but by microscopic wear patterns on his tools. the irony is profound. The same tombs meant to immortalize pharaohs are now preserving the workers' legacies in ways their builders never imagined. Infrared scans detect faded fingerprints in drying mortar, while isotopic analysis of tooth enamel reveals childhood malnutrition followed by steady meals once they joined construction crews. Even worker graffiti, once dismissed as vandalism, is now recognized as a vital historical archive. A scrawled complaint about missing rations becomes proof of labor disputes. A doodle of a cat reveals cultural influences. What emerges isn't just corrected history, it's a new ethical dimension. When we can sequence the genome of a teenage girl who painted Queen Nefertari's tomb, or reconstruct the face of a foreman from his skull, these people cease to be abstract labor statistics. They become individuals with allergies, healed fractures, and even dental work, proof that the society that built monuments to eternity also invested in keeping its builders alive. The stones may have been carved for gods and kings, but science is ensuring the workers finally get their rightful place in the story. Beneath the shifting sands of Egypt, a quiet ethical storm brews, one that pits the pursuit of knowledge against the sanctity of the departed. In the Valley of the Kings, where tourists marvel at golden sarcophagi, archaeologists face a dilemma. Should the graves of the workers who built these tombs be excavated for study or left undisturbed as final resting places? The skeletons of Deir el-Medina's artisans, with their chisels clasped in bony fingers, aren't just historical artifacts. They were people who laughed, loved, and likely dreamed of their own peaceful afterlife. Modern science can extract volumes from their bones, diet, disease, even migration patterns, but at what cost to their dignity? This tension isn't unique to Egypt. In China's terracotta army pits, researchers debate whether to excavate the mass graves of laborers buried near the emperor's tomb. Forensic analysis could reveal whether these workers were volunteers or convicts, but disturbing their remains risks repeating history's pattern of treating them as expendable. Even in Mesoamerica, the skeletal remains of Mayan builders beneath Chichen Itza's temples present a haunting question. Does studying their spinal deformities to understand ancient labor practices honor their contribution, or reduce them to clinical data points? The arguments on both sides carry weight. Proponents of excavation argue that these workers, erased from official histories, deserve to have their stories told. Advanced techniques like isotopic analysis can reconstruct individual lives, revealing if a woman buried with pigment jars migrated from Nubia, or whether a child's stunted growth resulted from malnutrition. One poignant example comes from Giza, where a worker's grave contained a small wooden duck, likely a toy for his child. Without excavation, such humanizing details would remain lost. Yet critics counter that science isn't the only lens that matters. Many cultures, including modern Egyptians, view disturbing graves as a profound violation. The ancient workers themselves left inscriptions pleading for their tombs to remain intact. One reads, "May my name endure in this place, unerased by time or hand." Some archaeologists now advocate for minimally invasive approaches, using ground-penetrating radar to map burial sites without digging, or studying already exposed remains rather than unearthing new ones. At Luxor, a compromise emerged when researchers digitally scanned a worker's mummy still wrapped in linen, preserving both the body and its secrets. The debate grows even thornier with commercial interests in play. Museums clamor for well-preserved skeletons to display alongside tools and pay stubs, creating what some call poverty tourism, gawking at the bones of the underprivileged. Meanwhile, descendants of indigenous builders, from Peru's Inca stonemasons to Native American earthwork laborers, increasingly demand repatriation of remains. The 1990 Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act in the U.S. set a precedent, but applying similar ethics to ancient Egyptian or Chinese workers sparks controversy. Are they our shared human ancestors, or do they belong to modern nations occupying the same land? Perhaps the answer lies in redefining what preservation means. At Saqqara, a new memorial wall lists every known worker's name recovered from Payroll Ostroka, giving them the recognition pharaohs monopolized. In Denmark, Viking-age craftsmen's graves are marked with reconstructions of their tools rather than exhumed bones. Technology offers middle paths, 3D printing replicas of skeletons for study while reburying originals, or using AI to simulate labor conditions without handling remains. The heart of the conflict isn't just ethics versus science, it's about how we value labor across millennia. When we debate whether to X-ray a stonemason's spine or leave his grave untouched, we're really asking, does posthumous recognition justify intrusion, or is leaving them in peace the ultimate respect? These workers built eternity for others. Now we must decide what eternity they deserve. From the Nile's golden deserts to China's mist-shrouded valleys, the echoes of chisels and the groans of sledges carried remarkably similar rhythms across ancient civilizations. Half a world apart, the builders of Egypt's pyramids and China's terracotta army faced identical physics puzzles: how to move mountains of stone without modern machinery. In both cultures, the solution emerged from observing nature. Egyptians wetting sand to reduce friction, Chinese workers laying icy roads in winter to slide massive statues into place. Yet the contrasts are just as revealing. Where Egyptian laborers left behind casual graffiti, complaints about rations, or sketches of supervisors as donkeys, Qin dynasty, artisans inscribed their names discreetly on warrior statues' undersides, a quiet bid for immortality beneath the emperor's gaze. Mesopotamia adds another layer to this global tapestry. While pharaohs entombed themselves in geometric perfection, Mesopotamian ziggurats rose as stairways to heaven, their mud brick cores requiring armies of workers to mold and bake millions of bricks. Cuneiform tablets from detail a surprising parallel to Egypt's Der el-Medina. Skilled workers received beer and silver payments, while conscripted laborers endured harsher conditions. One tablet records a protest where brickmakers refused to work until issued better straw for binding clay, an ancient strike mirroring those along the Nile. The universality of these struggles points to something deeper than coincidence. Whether carving limestone near Luxor or shaping life-sized warriors in Zion, workers developed near-identical solutions to shared problems. In Egypt, ramps spiraled up pyramid sides. In Mesoamerica, Mayans built inclined causeways to haul temple stones. Chinese builders used lever systems strikingly similar to those depicted in Egyptian tomb paintings. This wasn't parallel evolution. It was the inevitable result of human ingenuity confronting universal challenges of weight, gravity, and time. Yet cultural values surface in telling ways. Egyptian workers' villages like Der el-Medina show evidence of medical care and community life, reflecting a society that, however unevenly, valued its labor force. Contrast this with the Qin dynasty's reported burying of alive workers to protect tomb secrets, or the mass graves near Assyrian palaces holding skeletons with bound hands. The same hand that mixed mortar in Memphis might have faced vastly different fates in Babylon or Chang'an. What binds these disparate cultures isn't just shared techniques, but shared humanity. A Babylonian payroll list scratches the same existential plea as an Egyptian worker's graffiti, "Remember me." A Chinese artisan's hidden signature whispers the same defiance as a Mayan laborer's fingerprint pressed into stucco. Across continents and millennia, the builders of eternity left not just monuments, but proof that the human need to say, "I was here," transcends kings, borders, and even time itself. The stones may differ, but the hands that shaped them, calloused, persistent, yearning, tell one story. The pyramids still pierce the sky, the terracotta warriors stand frozen in formation, the tombs glow with eternal gold. But the greatest wonder isn't the monuments themselves. It's the ordinary hands that shaped the extraordinary. These builders weren't just muscle-moving stone. They were mathematicians calculating celestial alignments without computers, artists mixing pigments that outlast empires, problem solvers turning wet sand and copper chisels into feats modern engineers still marvel at. Their legacy isn't just in what they built, but in how they built it, with ingenuity that bordered on alchemy, teamwork that defied hierarchies, and a quiet persistence that whispers across millennia. Think about the precision of their craft. A single block in the Great Pyramid fits so perfectly you couldn't slide a razor blade between the seams, achieved without laser levels or steel tools. The terracotta warriors' facial expressions, each one unique, were sculpted by artists who likely never saw their work displayed. These weren't mindless laborers, they were masters of their trades, leaving behind fingerprints in mortar and doodles in hidden corners as silent signatures. Their work ethic wasn't born of fear, but of something far more powerful: pride in craftsmanship, the kind that makes a painter spend weeks perfecting a hieroglyph no pharaoh would ever scrutinize. But their story isn't just about skill, it's about resilience. Skeletons from worker cemeteries reveal healed fractures, spines bent from years of lifting, yet buried with tools as if ready to work in the afterlife. These people endured back-breaking labor, yes, but they also organized strikes for fair wages, scribbled love poems on pottery shards, and left behind the world's first known worker graffiti, a cheeky sketch of a foreman with donkey ears. Their humanity shouts from the ruins. They weren't just building tombs, they were building lives, families, a society within a society. So what do they teach us? That progress isn't just about the vision of kings, but the sweat of countless unnamed souls. When we admire ancient wonders today, we're seeing the result of collective genius: the farmer who devised a better rope knot, the cook who perfected bread rations to fuel construction, the child apprentice who mixed plaster with tiny, determined hands. Their lives remind us that history isn't a solo act. It's a chorus of voices, most now silent, but whose echoes shape our world. The next time you see a skyscraper or a bridge, remember, behind every marvel are people like Painab the painter, Merit the mortar mixer, the drunkards of Menkora crew who balanced stones and jokes with equal skill. Their tombs may be lost, but their lesson endures. Greatness isn't measured by what you take from the world, but what you give to it. And perhaps that's the truest immortality of all. If their stories moved you, share yours below. Let's keep these builders' memories alive, one remembered name at a